Baker Show.
This is Kev Baker, and welcome to tonight's live broadcast of the Kev Baker Show, right here on Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Tuesday night, and I'm promising you it's going to be another brilliant, information-packed show. And even later on in the show, get this, fingers crossed, all going well, the man himself will be back for hour number 2. Johnny Whistles appears to have really picked up today. He's in good health. I was speaking to him a little earlier on this evening, and he will be along for hour number 2 tonight. And that's really going to add to what is an already brilliant show, because tonight I'm going to be continuing a series of groundbreaking shows that I've been doing with Dr. Eric Karlstrom on the subject of gang stalking, and really taking a step back from there and looking at 21st century mind control, the phenomena known as targeted individuals, all that kind of stuff. And, you know, before I go to the doc himself, just to give people an idea of just the depth of information that Dr. Karlstrom has brought to the table here, and I know so many people are benefiting from. I mean, he's put together some really comprehensive notes here, and just to give you an idea of what we've covered in the past, and you can find all of this in the TFR archives. I've also put most of the shows onto YouTube. I say most because I'm sure one of our 9/11 specials got taken down at one point, because some of the stuff we talk about on here does get controversial. And we've talked about the precursors to gang stalking, things like Operation Garden Plot and Cable Splicer back in the 60s, the manual for organised gang stalking from the brilliant Dr. Ronnie Kilda and her book on Operation Gladio. We've got Gog's New Gestapo, a term that Dr. Karlstrom introduced here on the Kev Baker Show. And this stands for Global Organised Gang Stalking Groups, Neuro Warfare, Electronic Surveillance, Slavery, Tracking, Torture, PSYOP Operations, and all defined. It says that we've also got into Soviet psychotronics and US mind control. We've done 2 shows on that. The Brian Tew hypothesis on high-tech aspects of remote neural monitoring and remote neural manipulation. Now, like I say, we spoke about 9/11 as well, as a pretext, as a trigger to conduct foreign wars of aggression. And then we talked about Agenda 21 and the 17 points of the UN Agenda 2030. And finally, here on the list, we have spoke about and covered the history, the science, and even the dark magic behind mind control. And I've said this before, and I'll say it again as we continue these shows. I'm really proud of the information we're putting out, and the fact that a lot of people who are under these kind of programs are listening to this and they're getting something from it. And I wouldn't have been able to do any of this without Dr. Eric Karlstrom. And with so many new listeners coming to the show as well, we've done so many of these shows, Doc. You know, I'm going to let you give yourself a brief introduction tonight, because every time you've been on, I've had that generic bio for you. So I'm going to let you take the floor here and just tell people who you are before we get into this.
Okay, Kev. Well, thank you. It's always great to be on your show and have an opportunity really to talk about these issues. I am a retired professor of geography. I taught at 3 universities between 1981 and 2011. My field was physical and environmental geography. And I've done a fair amount of research in those areas and published in various scientific journals, international and national. I retired in 2011, and as it turned out, I really kind of just took my skills as a researcher and my interests and focused them on areas that I thought were the most important. So in a sense, I was granted this time then to focus my research energies on I think are some very critical issues for all of us. So I've maintained my identity as an educator, but it hopefully just extended my the focus of the people that I communicate my findings with. And your show, I think, has been excellent in this regard. We've done a year's worth of shows every once a month, and we've built now quite a library to try to understand the larger context of this thing that we call gang stalking, which I think is a very inadequate term, which is why I've come up with these other terms. So my kind of post professor research, graduate, postgraduate. My post-professor research has mostly centered on my 5 websites, which are 911nwo.com, naturalclimatechange.org, San Luis Valley Waterwatch.com, and the stuff we've been communicating about mostly is on my website, gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. And then finally, I have always enjoyed producing music. I play several instruments, and I have made a number of CDs, and those are on my music website, which is erickarlstrom.com. So I've been quite busy in my retirement, and I find that these issues are of tremendous significance. And so having a platform such as this to discuss these things is very important, I believe. So I guess that'll have to do for a bio here, Kev.
No, that's perfect. Some of the listeners, they were probably getting fed up with me saying the same bio over and over again, Doc. So, with that out of the way now, before we get into the information that you've put together for tonight, I would just like to briefly touch upon some news that happened recently that you mentioned before the show, because the whole internet, the whole world, were talking about a certain memo just before it got released. And of course, this is the Nunes memo that has set the political scene alight over in the US, all the revelations in that. And you were talking to me about that in a totally different context that I had ever put it before. And you were framing it in the same kind of material and world as we talk about on the show here with targeted individuals, right?
Yeah, I actually listened to an interesting interview between Dr. Adrian Krieg and Andrew Carrington Hitchcock, as a very recent interview about the Nunes memo. And he, as he describes it, and I think he describes it very accurately, it seems that during the presidential campaign, Trump and General Flynn and one of Trump's volunteer supporters were all subject to the same kinds of harassment and stalking techniques that we've been talking about. And if you go with the information, at least that Dr. Krieg provided, it seems like it was the Democratic Party, and of course they would have had the support of then President Obama, that was doing the stalking. So I actually sent out a little cryptic message to a group of some 240 fellow quote-unquote TIs or targeted individuals saying, perhaps we should reach out to President Trump, who also seems to be victimized by the same program.
Yeah, like I said to you before the show, I hadn't ever thought about it in that way at all, but that's exactly what we're looking at here. Some of the same tactics that we've spoke about were revealed in this Nunes memo. Right.
And so, and of course, what we've seen since is an enormous attempt to spin everything and whatnot. But if we go back to the core of some of the information presented in that memo, as Dr. Krieg did, I think we can get a glimpse of what happened. And what happened is kind of out of the same bag of dirty tricks that are applied in this global program.
And the reason I bring that up right at the start is to let people see that it really does not matter who you are. There is nobody too big to actually be put into one of these programs. And it comes in all various shapes and sizes. And like I say, you can look back over all the other shows we've done that covers all of this and so much more. And we're going to take it a stage further now tonight because the doc has put together a lot of information here. So, Doc, I'm going to hand it over to you right now, and I'm going to try not to interrupt too much. But you know what I'm like. I always end up with questions for you, and it makes it a great conversation in the end.
Absolutely. Please do interrupt when you have something. I think it does make it more dynamic and interesting. I as a former professor. I even got tired of the sound of my own voice sometimes. I like to break it up, you know. But how about this for kind of a tentative title? I'm not good at short, sweet titles. But for tonight, maybe Gang Stalking, parentheses, Counterintelligence, Electronic Surveillance, Tracking, and Torture, Mind and Behavioral Modification, as military perception management, cognitive infiltration, psychological warfare, and information warfare. And I think that if we look through the right documents, we'll see that there is an enormous kind of convergence of technology, patents, inventions, military documents, military position papers, political statements, etc., to suggest that this is really coming from that source. If we could start with this, Kev, I'll just throw out I've got about 465 posts now in my Gang Stalking MindControlCults.com website. And that's only been up for about a year and a half.
And
but here are
that into the actual chat room if people want to find that. That's over at tfrlive.com/chat. Anyone listening, you can feel free to join in there. And a lot of the conversation centered around what the doc's going to talk about. So, Doc, sorry about that. I'll let you get right into it.
Yeah, and I'd just like to read off some of these titles. Now, each of these is just the title. And obviously each has, fairly long substantive articles and or YouTubes associated with them. And some of them I've written, some of them I haven't written and just made my comments on. So, but it will acclimatize us, I think, so that we can kind of focus our discussion tonight. The most recent post, or one of the most recent posts I have, is C4ISR Systems, and that stands for Command, Control, Communication, and Computers, Intelligence, Surveillance, Reconnaissance. Okay, that's good militaries. C4ISR is a computer system that is being used. In fact, there's a magazine by the Journal of Net-Centric Warfare that is coming out once a month by the Defense Media Group called C4ISR. So this term should be a household. It should be a household term. I believe it's what's being used to gang stalk individuals all around the world. It's connected to the satellites. It's connected to the NSA supercomputers. Anyway, C4ISR systems used in U.S. military stalking, electronic tracking, and torture, mind control operations are made by Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, and Boeing. Surprise, surprise. And if you go to that particular post, you can see pictures right out from the ads or from the websites of these major defense contractors. Okay, so, I think we're getting to the point, Kev, where we're taking some of the mystery out of this, and we can see now how it's done. The second one I'd like to highlight is a post called Legislative Bill Against Organized Torture Act, which was written but never really proposed for the California legislature in 2018, this year. And it as per usual, it combines a lot of truth with a lot of nonsense. So I think it's probably a very bad bill, but at least it recognized that this organized torture is happening. Number 3, the world is the battlefield, quote, U.S. SOCOM Special Operations Command involved in 134 counterterrorism wars as of a newspaper article in 2013. Fourth post, government technology to read your thoughts and implant new ones, remote neuromonitoring and manipulation. These are a couple articles I got off the website. Number 5, major U.S. government intelligence, military, electromagnetic mind control projects between 1952 and 1998. Are we starting to see some patterns here? Number 6, directed energy weapons for political control, a PBF. Number 7, U.S. Air Force, quote, Informations Operations, IO Doctrine Documents, 1996, 2001, 2005. Number 8, Joint Electromagnetic Spectrum Management Options in the U.S. Military and Intelligence Forces, Joint Chiefs of Staff Publication 6-01, 2012. Number 9, Intelligence and Electronic Warfare Operations Manual, U.S. Army Field Manual, FM 34/1, 1983, and updated to the present time. Number 10, Gang Stalking Predicted and Justified in New Global War Against Individuals and Groups Called For in, quote, NSA 2025, Future Warfare Strategies and Technologies, which came out in 2001.
And Doc, I mean, that actual paper there, that's one of the most bizarre papers I have ever read through. I can remember doing a full show about that NASA 2025 Future Warfare, and it reads like something from a science fiction movie. It truly does. However, this is a real document.
Yes, and we have to always bear in mind, Kev, that the military is about 50 or 60 years ahead of everybody else in terms of their high technology. And this was pointed out by Dr. Ronnie Kilda, who was the chief medical officer in northern Finland, who wrote a book called Bright Light on Black Shadows, and who was killed after 30 years of torture by this system. So she makes that point. And also when the government military, such as the Air Force or NASA, put out a document like this talking about the future, generally speaking, it is technology that is already available to them. So that is how they operate. They kind of roll out the future, which is actually coded. It's the present. 11, patents, articles, and statements on mind control and directed energy. 12, timeline of human experimentation and population control and resources. Read top secret CIA, NSA, FBI, DOD operations. 13, and I hope we can get to this one a bit tonight, Kev, cognitive infiltration, quote unquote, of, quote, conspiracy theorists, quote unquote, equals gang stalking, equals information warfare against citizens.
Oh, I really want to hear you talking about that tonight, Doc, because, I mean, that is very, very apt for everyone listening to this show indeed.
Yeah, what is cognitive infiltration but mind control? It's one form. And now it turns out there are many forms. Okay, number 14, the university and the security state. Department of Homeland Security, DHS, joins Pentagon and CIA on campus. And in this article by a journalist, actually a guy who was a professor of cognitive studies for many years, talks about how many universities are now taking grant money from the Pentagon to do, studies in counterterrorism, intelligence-led policing, and all this kind of thing. All these coded words that again relate back to probably to gang stalking. Number 15, United States of Tyranny is my title. DOD, Obama, Congress legalized false flag propaganda, gang stalking, and treason. We talked about that last week, and the 12 kinds of propaganda used by the military. The Pentagon gets $4 billion a year of their some $680 billion annual budget to propagandize Americans.
We were laughing before the show because, I mean, this is a blatant example of governmental hypocrisy, right? Because we've got all of this thing with Mueller raging over in the US, Russian conspiracies everywhere, seemingly infiltrating the US elections, and they go and indict 13 trolls from Russia. Yet at the same time, the US government have got legislation to use the same propaganda against the same people. Is that not hypocrisy? I don't know. Doc, you have to laugh.
Indeed, you do. And of course, this kind of propaganda that they're talking about here, if we read the article carefully, and this is by a group called themselves Anonymous Patriots, many of these Nevada-type shootings would qualify then for propaganda. So then these staged events, these staged terrorist events, could be paid for with our own tax dollars. And you talk about hypocrisy. I mean, that's off the chart. The next one, ex-military wife Kay Griggs, who herself has a bachelor's and a master's. Interestingly enough for you, Kev, a master's in Scottish history, because she's a very, very well connected Virginian who traces her ancestry back to James Madison and, various governors and stuff. Very smart lady. And she did a series of 8 interviews or 8 hours of interviews back in 1998. And I notated these, and boy, she gives the insider information as to what's really happening, which helps us understand the whole quote unquote gang the gang stalking system. And I've subtitled this, U.S. military is a mind control gang stalking cult operation run by sexual deviants, homo and bisexuals. The next one, 17, is a U.S. Army manual that Kay Griggs found in Goodwill. It's kind of funny how God works, I guess. And she lived in Norfolk, Virginia, which she says is the center of military activity, or the largest military activity establishment in the United States. This was a field manual, Intelligence and Electronic Warfare Operations Manual, U.S. Army, 1983 to 2009. Maybe I mentioned that earlier. Then the next one, the organization, also known as the Syndicate, and its method and goals exposed by Dr. Ronnie Kilda in her book, Bright Light on Black Shadows. Now, this is a little different. Now it's not just the government. Now it's more of an international mafia. And
it's what we were saying earlier as well, because we were talking about Trump with the Nunes memo, and off air we were almost kind of theorizing just where does the president's job lie within the power structure. I mean, how close to the top of the pyramid is somebody like Obama, Bush, Trump now? And, I don't think they're the be-all and end-all. They're just a puppet, the same as the rest, Doc.
Absolutely. I think that, well, of course, John F. Kennedy thought he, could lead the country. And we saw what happened, the public execution of John F. Kennedy in 1963. I think perhaps you can make the case that he's been the last woke president who has thought that he could really run the country. And this is a very, very sad. But, Kay Griggs in her interviews makes it very clear that the top military people they're almost indistinguishable from the New Jersey, Brooklyn mafia. And that there's really no difference. And here's the connection, really. It's the top military people with the mafia. And I'm sure intelligence fits in there as well. And we're starting to get a sense of the structure of this cabal, or this organization, or the syndicate that is behind so much. We call it maybe the deep state or the shadow government or whatever, but it's a very small group of people, according to Kay Griggs, and this gives us some hope. And she names the names, she names the operations. I encourage people to read through the notes and listen to these interviews. If you want to know, for instance, who did Oklahoma City, she'll tell you. You want to know who did the Panama coup that deposed Emmanuel Noriega, who himself was a CIA asset for 30 years. Well, read that article or read those notes and listen to those interviews. If you want to know who killed Ron Brown and Vince Foster and Forrestal and all these others, I mean, these people were whacked by special operations forces right within our own military, Marine Corps, etc. So assassinations. These are kind of military political assassinations.
Now, Doc, before we get to the break, something jumps off the page at me here. It's got the CIA, Tavistock Institute, and Global, quote, Intelligence Police Gestapo State. That Tavistock, they've got their hands dirty in all of this.
Oh, very much. And of course, I've got a big post on that and done a lot of reading about that. The Tavistock Institute was founded at the end of World War I, came out of the British Army Psychological Warfare Division, and it was led by a psychologist by the name of Sir John Rawlings Rees. And immediately, what they first studied was how to create post-traumatic stress disorder, then known as shell shock, in individuals and in the public mind. And they started doing this in 1921. Well, as it turns out, the CIA came out of the Office of Strategic Services during World War II, and the Office OSS was trained, in fact, by British MI6 and the Tavistock Institute. And, James Agee, the author, who's ex-CIA, one of the two primary ex-CIA guys who spilled the beans, he said that MI6 and especially Tavistock controlled the CIA as late as 1961. So, and 1961 does seem to be a watershed year, but that we can talk about that later. But yeah, Tavistock is the world brainwashing center to this day. And we have many, many offshoots in the United States, like the Stanford Research Institute.
Well, just
and many
I thought there, Doc, because we are right on the break. If you want to find these articles, all you need to do is go over to Dr. Karlstrom's website at gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. But not just yet, because we are only getting started. We'll be back right after the break. After these messages, please don't go anywhere.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Dr. Eric Karlstrom is my very special guest tonight, right here on the Kev Baker Show on Truth Frequency Radio, www.tfrlive.com. Now, if you haven't checked out our website here at TFR before, I urge you to do so. So if you're listening over on YouTube or in the archives, things like that, please spread the word about TFR. And the shows so far this year, even if I say so myself, have been getting better and better all the time. Jimmy Jean's in the chat room, an absolutely amazing show again last night. And tonight, taking it to another level again. And it's quite easy to have a good show on the network when I've got people to call on, like Dr. Eric Karlstrom. And we're getting into and continuing our series of shows on mind control, gang stalking, all that kind of stuff. You can catch all of our previous shows in the archive. And Doc, I want to come back to you because there's another couple of articles you want to tell people about before we get into a couple of topics that we're going to touch upon something we talked about last time. And you've got so much new stuff here to talk about as well. So without any further interruptions from me, over to you, Doc.
Okay, yeah. We're going through these articles that are on my Gang Stalking Mindcontrolcults.com website. And I really would encourage people to look at some of these articles and try to, assess them and learn what they can from them, give me feedback if they have some. And the last two I was going to mention here are Organized Gang Stalking is a CIA torture and MK Ultra mind control program. And you mentioned the CIA Tavistock Institute and the Global Intelligence Police Gestapo state, which this seems to be a big part of, the gang stalking. And finally, organized gang stalking as covert global CIA operation. Now, the CIA gets blamed for a lot, but I think there's good reason for that. What I've come to here is that this program is kind of an application of the research that came out of the CIA's MK Ultra mind control programs back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s and onward. And that was the basis of their Kubark torture manual, also called interrogation manual, which came out in 1963 and then was updated in 85. And these involve technologies and techniques to change and control behavior and or to covertly and extra legally dispose of designated targeted individuals. So, but this is kind of the intellectual basis of these programs, because they studied all kinds of electronic, chemical, biological mind control techniques, as well as hypnosis and electroshock and things like that, sleep deprivation, everything they could think of in 149 sub-projects, and learned as much as they could. They actually very much brought into their field of research the people working in psychology, anthropology, sociology, etc. So in a sense, they have weaponized the field of psychology in a very real sense, because the CIA paid for a lot of their research back in those days. And this then had a lasting impact indeed on the profession, according to some sources I've read. But now many segments of the society are now enlisted in this effort. It's a civil military operation. And Dr. Ronnie Kilda, this lady from Finland, medical doctor who just passed in 2015, she describes this program, which I've called Gog's New Gestapo, which you defined as the most important policy of the United States. Now, if that is the case, wow, we do have a big tiger by the tail here, Kev. And that's why it keeps getting bigger and bigger. So, and it was Mark Emmerich's book, New World War, Revolutionary Methods for Political Control, 2011, which said that behind these programs is, quote, the interagency, which of course includes the DHS, Department of Homeland Security, Neighborhood Watch at the local level to report suspicious activity. And then this goes to the DHS fusion centers, and then they identify, their terrorism watch list, potential terrorists, blah, 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 and they flag them. And then pretty soon people get on this list without any, recourse. They don't know that they've been on the list. They don't know why they're being put on the list. NSA has been collecting the metadata and operating the conscious supercomputers and doing the surveillance and apparently sharing all this information in real time, first with the State of Israel. Air Force controls the satellites, apparently, according to recent information put out by a group of TIs in a website called targetedjustice.com. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we have the use of these C4ISR and related systems that are built and sold to all branches of the military by Lockheed Martin and their subsidiary Leidos, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, and many others. And we now have, I think, a very co-opted professional academic system where, over 100 universities, the cognitive studies programs are taking grants from the Department of Defense to
It's a giant machine, Doc. That's what they've got. They've got the universities sewn up, and then they take the best minds from there. They go to the military, or they go to one of these private companies like Boeing or Lockheed or something like that. And Dr. Ronnie Kilda, the most important policy of the United States, and it absolutely is. We mentioned the NSA there, and think of their mass surveillance in the USA. They're taking absolutely every citizen's data. Now, that doesn't mean they're looking at over 350 million people's Facebooks or mobile phone records or stuff like that, but they're collecting all of that data. And this is because, you don't live in a democracy in the USA or over here. And like I was saying to the doc before the show, it's a conocracy. It's a big con game. And this is the ultimate tool of control. And if you can control the minds of the people, they never ever see the con game that's at work. And that's what we're really talking about here, Doc. This is a big, huge machine from start to finish, and it's very clever.
Oh, it is. And I think you've hit the nail on the head, and this is exactly the conclusion that the Anonymous Patriots came to, that Obama was able to, with the propaganda efforts of, they say, the BBG, the Broadcasting Board of Governors, and high up in the military, that has $4 billion a year to propagandize American citizens and to shape our perceptions, information warfare, etc. They can get support for any policy that they need. And of course, this article says that Obama signed the small guns arms treaty with the UN near the beginning of his administration, but could not get Congress to go along. So what happened? All of a sudden, we start getting all these false flag terrorist events across the country to try to get the country to give up their Second Amendment rights and give up their guns. So it is a machine. It is a gigantic machine. But now we're starting to figure out, how it operates and who does what, and and we can see gang stalking now in its larger context. Gang stalking would be perhaps the most brutal possible retaliation against individuals who are not ideologically assimilated, you might say, to this machine, to this totalitarian democracy, if you want, or the New World Order, whatever you want to call it. But also involved in the interagency then would be law enforcement and judges, and right down to your local police who are taking grants from Homeland Security, as well as federal, state, and local agencies, which are also connected economically. And again, if you've got upwards of $800 billion a year, which the military has, to play with, you can control the society to a large extent. And I think this financial control and these personal connections have created this machine which operates towards its own self benefit, not the benefit of the people involved in the country, of course. So in our discussion, Kev, about Operation 9/11, which seems to be so pivotal as a trigger to get Americans on board for these wars in the Middle East that mainly benefit Israel, as well as ramping up the military police state at home and abroad. This course was another false flag propaganda. Synthetic terror event made in the USA, but also the interagency in this case was in close cooperation with Israel and the American Zionim. Remember the comment of Prime Minister Ariel Sharon in October 2001 when he said, don't tell me America's going to do this, America's going to do that. Let me be very clear. We, the Jews, control America, and the Americans know it. Well, when I heard that, it kind of went in one ear and out the other. But my research shows that to be the case.
These false flags and just these events in general, it doesn't have to be a false flag anymore, because we see every time and time again, that at the very least, Doc, the FBI or the CIA, they've had some kind of intelligence beforehand that somebody has the potential to do something, and then shockaroonie, they don't do anything about it. And Joe Bloggs goes on to do exactly what people warned he might do. And that in itself, that's allowing these events to happen. And then the false flag comes afterwards with all the kind of measures and security stuff that they roll out on the back of it.
Yeah, I remember watching the footage, Kev, on the Orlando murders. I guess 54 were killed in some gay bar or something like that. And they show all this footage of, the craziness. And it looked like all crisis actors to me. Didn't look like they had any legitimate military police or ambulance people there. It just looked like a bunch of people with, who'd put gauze around some leg and rented some crutches for $5. And they're just, to me, it looked like there was a lot of play acting going on. So a lot of the budget then for propaganda then would include these staged events and would include, just like the Jade Helm operations of 2015, would include the hiring of crisis actors, et cetera. In fact, what is a perp in gang stalking? He is a surveillance role player. Okay, that's a crisis actor. That's the same concept. Now we've got this propagandization, these actors right down into the community street level to harass the targeted individual. And again, this is a very well-oiled machine, as you mentioned, and I would say gang stalking is an integral part of it. It's really the sharp edge of the stick. Because the people who are gang stalked are really suffering tremendous torture, psychological and otherwise, as well as electronic weaponry.
And people are guinea pigs as well, in a way, Doc, because, they'll be trying out all of the new kind of weaponry and all the new EMF stuff and all that kind of wacky stuff that we don't even know about yet, like we were saying earlier. They're 50, 60 years ahead of us, and these people are literally guinea pigs as well as anything else.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this goes back to MK Ultra too. They said that, we have to have subjects. Never, you dehumanize the person involved. We have to have subjects in terminal experiments. And then, of course, we have to know how to dispose of the subject if it does go terminal. And so they would have safe houses. And this goes back to the 50s. And our friend Frank Olson, of course, saw this. He was a CIA chemist, and he was, in fact, poisoned and pushed out of and bludgeoned on the back of a head and pushed out of a window, and killed for having a conscience in this sense, because his fellow CIA psychiatrist got nervous that he might, spill the beans. But this is the pattern. We have to have live subjects to test our equipment on, and often, and the tradition is to use your own citizens. Usually they'll go for blacks or some other minority or handicapped people or prisoners. But now it seems to be virtually anybody who gets on these watch lists, including, of course, dissidents and whistleblowers, et cetera, people whose attitude needs to be adjusted one way or the other, or they need to be, according to the power structure, they need to be removed, isolated and removed. That's another acronym, ISR. We mentioned on C4 ISR. That stands for Intelligence, Surveillance, and Reconnaissance. According to one ex-military guy, the ISR acronym is also used in military operations to isolate and remove. ISR, isolate and remove. This is exactly what's being done with the targeted individuals. I can speak from some experience because I've been targeted, to my knowledge, and aware of it since 2013. So I'm watching this from both ends, from the street level, as well as much reading and research as I can do. So, and yeah, of course, in 2002, right after 9/11, the U.S. NORTHCOM was established, U.S. Northern Command, and that extended the battle space to North America. And now all Americans can be considered enemy combatants if they're put on these lists, and then they can be targeted. And of course, that means the full weight of the military establishment and their technology can come down on innocent citizens. So we have.
Land of the free and home of the brave, yet everyone is a target in the homeland. There's something's gone far wrong there, Doc. It really has.
Well, yeah, absolutely.
Just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little bit. And of course, this is why I've looked into the element of capture. And I think the United States government has been subject to a series of captures or coups. Going back to the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, in which the European bankers basically took control of the economy in a conspiracy, which has been well described. And then in 1947, we had the National Security Act, which formed the CIA. And that gave this, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds and the bankers their private army. And then, of course, the 1963 assassination of John F. Kennedy, which seems to involve a lot of these technologies, by the way, these mind control technologies in the process, also seem to be a joint CIA Mossad operation, and 9/11. So we got 4 coups, a sequential series of takeovers, I would say, of the United States government. So it's not that people like me want to bring down the government. No, we'd like to get the rats out of there and bring back the Constitution, and maybe even bring back the New Testament. And then we might have a decent country again. But as long as the present leadership is in there, they've more or less taken over. And I think a lot of mind control and coercion, and of course bribery and blackmail is being used to control the people in the Congress and et cetera. So it's up to the American people and the people of the world now to try to counter this juggernaut, which you say is a machine.
No, it truly is. Especially the more we go into this, Doc, the more that we can see that this is the most important policy for the US, because it is so vast, it's so wide-reaching.
Yeah, and globally, I mean, if I believe that, when I talk to people and email people who are targets, in Australia and England and elsewhere around the world, and of course, those nations would be cooperating with the world's only superpower, which has a defense budget which is equal to the defense budgets of the next largest military states, next 10 largest military states, and that has been their proportion for a long time. And our military gets proportionally more money than is generated by all the corporations in America. So, we have a very unbalanced situation in America where the military is the rogue elephant in the living room. It's calling the shots. It's our Constitution says, and our Declaration of Independence says God's on the top. Then you have the citizens, and then you have the government, whose the job of the government is to serve the citizens, and then you have the military, whose job is to serve the government. And now, by the power which has been kind of accumulated by the military. They've turned that whole thing upside down. So military is on top, and then government, and then the citizens. They no longer have those rights anymore. And I've got one of my posts saying, laws of God and man that are violated by this organized stalking program, and every single Bill of Rights is broken. So it's entirely a criminal felony, and yet much of the society is involved in doing it. We've criminalized the society thereby, and I would argue also satanized, because this is a very evil program. So we're dealing with something pretty serious here.
And I'm glad we've kind of connected that darker element to this, because that's something we see no matter what topic I touch on the show, Doc. I can go from technology to the way out there stuff, but there's always that dark magic attached to this that this cabal are using against us.
Yeah, and cabal is a good choice of words, because I think it has the same root as Kabbalah, which, of course, the Jewish Kabbalah is the system of Babylonian Satanism and black magic, which animates this drive for world control that this particular group has been involved with for thousands of years now. So Kabbalah, Kahal, these words are very revealing in and of themselves if you know anything about the Kabbalah. But let me just read a little bit about why gang stalking works. This is from chapter 10 in the book Bad Experiments. Not my writing, but I think it describes the system pretty well. Gang stalking and related psychological attacks are designed to surround, isolate, and eventually destroy its victim. The gang stalker's routines may develop slow over a period of months or years. The gang stalker's intent is to completely surround the victim, cutting him off from friends, family, and other support systems. Eventually, the victim's 24-hour daily routine is monitored and manipulated by gang stalkers and other covert operatives. The psychological attack eventually overwhelms the emotions of the victim. He becomes mentally unbalanced, his emotional reserves are depleted, and he is isolated from any support systems that can bolster him. He will eventually react to these relentless psychological attacks in a way that results in incarceration, homelessness, suicide, or death. This gang stalking methodology falls under a system of psychological operations being developed and tested on American citizens by covert quasi-law enforcement agencies. Well, isn't that sweet? I mean, this is declaring war, of course, on the civilian population of America and other countries, using psychological warfare techniques which were once developed, against foreign enemies. Now it's turned towards the citizen. It's interesting. I have an uncle who was recently passed who was high in the CIA. And I remember he took a trip to South America one time and came back, and I was talking to him about it. I don't know what exactly his capacity was. He is officially retired, but they say you don't retire. And he say, it was interesting to distinguish the countries where the guns were turned inward from the countries where the guns were turned outward. In other words, the countries where the guns were turned inward were targeting their own citizens. Well, this is in fact what we have, isn't it, Kev? We have countries where the guns, now silent electronic weapons, secret, silent, you can't see them, they're invisible, but they're turned against the civilian population.
Exactly.
Well, I would argue,
it used to be, if you kind of make the analogy with a fence, on a border, it used to be the barbed wire would point out the way so nobody could get in, but now the barbed wire points in the way, Doc.
That's another good way to visualize this. Guns turned inward or outward, barbed wire turned inward or outward. Kind of tells you what that country is all about. And now let's go back to the basic process described above, which I just read, has been taught by the CIA since the 1950s, quote unquote. This is from the CIA Human Resource Exploitation Manual. The purpose of all coercive techniques is to introduce psychological regression in the subject by bringing a superior outside force to bear on his will to resist. This sounds like it's right out of the Tavistock Institute. Regression is basically a loss of autonomy, a reversion to an earlier behavioral level. As the subject regresses, his learned personality traits fall away in reverse chronological order. He begins to lose the capacity to carry out the highest creative activities, to deal with complex situations, to cope with stressful interpersonal relationships or to cope with repeated frustrations. In other words, how to break a person down. And this, again, sounds like it comes right out of it. But if we go back to this CIA Kubark torture manual, it's based on 4 simple principles. And they are used, of course, in all death squads, in Abu Ghraib and at Guantanamo Bay, etc. And of course, in gang stalking. Number 1, causing self-inflicted harm. This is the primary earmark of CIA torture programs. Mental illness, to impose mental illness, post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, and suicide, etc. Cleverly to get the individual to harm themselves. Use sensory disorientation. Of course, they can do this electronically now with voice to skull and sounds, silent sound, etc. And many different military technologies, directed energy weapons, electronic harassment, telephonic harassment, weaponized neurological technologies, et cetera, et cetera. Number 3, attacking individual fears. Of course, this can be done electronically and with psyops and the street theater, et cetera. Personal and family safety are threatened, psyops, terrorism, no touch invisible, physical torture under the constant threat of death, psyops, brain fingerprinting, COINTELPRO, as et cetera, et cetera. And then number 4, the last one, is attacking cultural identity.
Now, Doc, before we move on, one of our regular listeners, Don, in the chat room, brilliant question. I mean, we've covered this before, but I think it's important that you kind of quickly cover this again, and I'll get your answer on the other side of the break. But Don wants to know any of the countermeasures to such activity we're talking about. And when we come back on the other side, I'll get the doc to quickly run through that, because we do like here. Join us after the break. We'll be right back. Dr. Eric Hallstrom, special guest tonight. Absolutely amazing.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Number 2 on tonight's Kev Baker Show, right here on Truth Frequency Radio, and we're continuing our groundbreaking series on gang stalking, targeted individuals, 21st century mind control, all of the above and then some, with Dr. Eric Karlstrom. And before I go back to the doc for some solutions and some old kind of precautions that people can take against the kind of activity we're talking about here, you know, I was promising people, I was telling them keep their fingers crossed, because, and I need to cue the drum roll, please. That's right, he's back. Johnny Whistles, he's with us. And Johnny, great to have you back. And all the times that I talk about having a drum roll, I wish I had one. One of the listeners sent me that, so we now have our own drum roll, and I can't think of a better time to unleash it, man.
Ah, fantastic, mate. Honestly, that's brilliant. Yeah, doing well, Kev. Today had a good day, so I'm just hoping, Kev, it's all kind of going away. Do you know what I mean? I'm on these injections now 3 days a week, so hopefully everything's falling back into place, mate.
Absolutely, and I hope you're feeling good tomorrow. We can get into everything, Kevin, Johnny night. But tonight we are joined by Dr. Eric Karlstrom, and I know you like to have the conversations with the doc as well, because we get deep into all of these topics. And if you want to check out the doc's work, go over to Gang Stalking mindcontrolcults.com. And Doc, welcome back for hour number 2. And before the break, I was posing a question from Don in the chat room, and it's a question that all of us really probably ask at some point when we're listening to this. How can we cope with this? How can we prevent this? And what actions can we take at home right now as citizens to actually fight back?
Yeah, this is a very important question. This is where the rubber meets the road, really. So I'm glad Don asked that question. We've kind of outlined several components of this. You know, gang stalking being a very limited term, but certainly there's the actual stalking on the street theater, et cetera, which is meant to psychologically break the individual down. In the process that we read in Mark M. Rich's book, The New World War, in the process, the sixfold phase is there's a selection process, and then there's a surveillance process. And that can take a couple, 3 years for them to surveil you and to try to get a psychological profile on the individual. So they'll actually have teams of trained psychologists to figure out everything they can about you and where your buttons are, how they can manage to destroy you. I mean, this is no question. This is war. And then there is the defamation phase, in which they send people out into the community to try to destroy your reputation with lies, and that's concurrent with the actual stalking phase with street theater and psy-acts and psy-actors, etc. And then there's the electronic phase where you're subject to electronic weapons, and then finally the monitoring phase. So those 6 phases. I would argue in general that the first and most important step in countering all this is to try to understand the program. So education comes first. The psyops part, if you know something about psyops and you know how the system works, I think that is your best defense. In general, I think your best bet is not to psychologically react, because what they're doing in the process of provoking you with these street theater things is to try to map your responses. Now, if Brian too is correct about the 2 hypothesis, and they're actually trying to mind map you, trying to get a digital copy of your brain, they do this through trauma. They traumatize you, and then they gauge your responses by actually taking EEGs. They're actually taking little photos of your brain and seeing which areas are lit and which aren't. And then they incorporate that information back into their supercomputer, and then they give the next psy-act or attack in order to provoke you again. This is, according to Brian too, this is the hyper game theory of John Nash. John Nash invented the game theory, and now it's hyper game theory. So they're always provoking, and they're always measuring your responses. So probably your best bet is not to respond. If you can do that, ignore them. That's the simplest, because then they don't have anything to work with. Again, education, if you understand what's happening, it's a little easier to deal with it, because they're very clever about making situations that put you in a very awkward spot, and you have to react. So again, there's the street theater. There's also the electronic attack aspect. Now, various people talk about shielding. Whether you should use this gauge of this metal or that gauge of that metal to protect you from electronics, different frequencies and wavelengths, and what works best. I've got some of that on my website, and you can go on and you can read about different kinds of shielding. One simple way to shield yourself from electronic attack is to just move, move around. But then, of course, there's also what Brian too is calling the remote neural manipulation and remote neural monitoring. And for that, apparently there's this steady stream of electromagnetic radiation coming to your brain from these conscious supercomputers and going back.
Yeah, and I mean, earlier on, I seen one of the images in one of the articles, and it was a high-frequency satellite, something like that. And we've got Elon Musk talking about launching 4,450 satellites, miniature satellites, into space so that no part of the Earth can have internet, right? It's just a total, every rural area. And think of that then, because then we're all in this electronic grid, and we're all susceptible to this. There's literally nowhere that people will be safe from this eventually.
Well, you can kind of tell where Elon Musk is coming from, can't you? Because this is all part of the control grid. Without these cell towers, et cetera, and cell phones, this system couldn't operate. So by wanting to extend it to that extent, he's obviously on the side that wants the total control. And if we look at his pedigree, I think we will find out what that is. But Brian too suggests that mental shielding is very useful, in terms of warding off this exchange. It's very hard to wrap around your mind around the idea that there is actually a conscious supercomputer, which is through satellites and cell towers, etc., is connected to your brain. It's very hard to get that around your mind, but it does
Not
seem
much on this show, Doc. Not so much, because this ties in with all the kind of stuff that we cover on here. So, I mean, this isn't really a leap too far for the audience, because it fits perfectly with everything that we've covered on so many various topics, and they all lead back to and link together. And like we say all the time, this really is painting a bigger picture every show we do.
Yeah, it is. It's still mind-boggling to me, Kev, but it does seem to be the case. And assuming that is the case, then Brian too has these ideas for mental shielding, and he would say the best one is to learn. And this is a little kind of a complex concept, but he says learn to read active memory. In other words, learn to distinguish what is your own thought from something that might be injected into your brain. See, what they want to do is they want to get you dependent on the injects. They can inject voices and thoughts and images, etc. And you need to learn to distinguish what's yours. I wouldn't think that. I wouldn't, and I've actually gotten so I can do that. Another one is, and then of course, if it's not your
Doc, before you move on too far, Johnny Whistles, I see you've got a question here for the Doc.
Kev, what it is when you talk about these thousands of microsatellites going up into space and probably going all around the planet to make sure that everybody has internet, for some reason I get the picture of how we look at Earth and the way it's joined up by triangles. And each one of them would be one of these satellites.
Well, it's quite interesting, John, because Musk himself, his spokesman, somebody for the SpaceX, were talking about it being set up in different constellations. That's the actual language that they were using, and this is the way it seems to be going. And like I say, once this is up and running, and it will be, whether it's Elon Musk or somebody else, Ilana Freeland comes on and shares her brilliant research into the space fence. I mean, this is here right now, and this is going on, Doc.
Yeah. It's almost terrible to contemplate, because free will is our most and the freedom of thought and the privacy of our thoughts is probably our most fundamental basic right, and this right is now being violated on a scale that most people can't even fathom. As you say, on this show, people are the audience here is a little better positioned, informed to kind of get a grasp of this. But going back to Brian too, he would say listening to pleasing music lights up different parts of the brain and entrains the brain. See, what they want to do is they want to entrain your brain with this steady stream of electromagnetic radiation. Now, if your brain can be focused on something else, like pleasing music, then that would make it very difficult for them to operate. So I play banjo and guitar, and I sell CDs, and I listen to a lot of music, and sometimes even with headphones at night to try to have pleasing music to kind of counter the potential that this system has. Another one is to multitask, do several things at the same time. Then they don't have a clear signal. Another one, well, maybe that's enough. I've got an article about the two articles, and we've done 2 interviews on this. So if people want to go to those interviews and talk and read my notes and listen to our interviews, they'll hear Brian Two's ideas of how to counter this. It's probably very, very important that we all start to think about these countermeasures, as they're called. Shielding is one, and then our own mental shielding is probably the most important. But we've been focusing on general education. What's going on? Who's doing it? Why? And now that the practical result now should be how do we protect ourselves and how do we stop it? And I'm very much hoping, Kev, in future interviews we can start talking about solutions.
Oh, definitely. We should dedicate a full show to that. But it seems to be every time we kind of spend the few weeks apart between shows, something always comes along, Doc, and this information is ever evolving.
Yes, it is. But yeah, as the technologies evolve, but there's so much, they're so far ahead of us that we really need a lot of catch up work here. Um, DARPA with their narrative networks as a form of mind control, the subliminal sound, the SSS, silent sound spread spectrum of ultra high frequency waves and carrier frequencies. I mean, we need to start being conversant with these technologies that the military has. A lot of this is now declassified, and to protect ourselves, we need to understand these weapons. Another one is ultrasound neural interface program, which can be used to change a person's beliefs, change a person's sense of identity and memory. Well, you might say, well, why would they want to do that? Well, this goes right back to the MK Ultra original remit, which was we want to change, we want to get people to do our bidding, even if it's against their self-interest and their sense of self-preservation. So right from 1953, when MK Ultra started, the goal was to change people's sense of identity. And the way to do that, according to our friend Dr. Ewan Cameron, is what gives a person a sense of their place in the universe is, number one, their sensory perceptions, and number two, their memory. And if you can mess with their sensory perceptions and change their memories, you've now changed their identity. And so much of what's going on is an attempt to do this. And it's by this machine. And one of the ways they do it is transcranial magnetic stimulation, TMS, which causes emotional changes and influences body motions and can be used to disrupt, there you go, political dissent and extremism. So again, they really hate those dissidents, and they got lots of ways to counter that now, including the gang stalking system. Another way they can use it, another technique, is pulsed ultrasound that can be used to change brain chemistry with effects similar to the TMS, the transcranial magnetic stimulation. And of course, in 2013, Obama and DARPA cooperated with Obama's Brain Initiative. So today we have all these federal agencies cooperating on with dozens of technology firms and academic institutions and scientists and other key contributors to the field of neuroscience, and they've come up with some interesting new programs. Let me just rattle these off while we have time here, Kev. These are DARPA programs. Electrical prescriptions, shorthand electrics. The electrics program aims to help the human body heal itself through neuromodulation of organ functions using ultra miniaturized devices, approximately the size of individual nerve fibers, which could be delivered through minimally invasive injection. Okay, this is like the UN Agenda 2030. Hey, that sounds great. But the translation is, for electrics, military control of our neurological systems. So just the Orwellian opposite. Be hand proprioception and touch interfaces, acronym haptics. The haptics program aims to create fully implantable, modular, and reconfigurable neural interface microsystems that communicate wireless with external modules, such as a prothesis interface link, to deliver naturalistic sensations to amputees. Okay, sounds wonderful. But translation is wireless brain control over other electronic systems, robots, vehicles, planes. Third one, neurofunction, activity, structure, and technology. NeuroFast is the shorthand. The NeuroFast program seeks to enable unprecedented visualization and decoding of brain activity to better characterize and mitigate threats to the human brain, as well as facilitate development of brain-in-the-loop systems to accelerate and improve functional behaviors. The program has developed Clarity, all capital letters, a revolutionary tissue preservation method, and builds off recent discoveries in genetics, optical recordings, and brain-computer interfaces, offering faster, better views of the entire brain. Translation, the basic cybernetic interfaces between humans and machines. Okay, there we got to the transhumanism thing of cyber.
Just wow. I mean, last night I was touching on the latest AI kind of story, and they're talking about immortality being a real thing by 2050, Doc. And again, I take the dates off things. I don't look at the date. I just see it as a statement as now they've cracked immortality. And I mean, this is the way that they're going with this technology. But what worried me was the fact that they said that to do it, instead of it being a radical kind of expansion of our own bodies, it would be a radical conversion into something more like an android.
Absolutely, a cyborg, yeah, cybernetic organism. And the vision of this really comes back to the 40s and a book called Cybernetics by Dr. Norbert Wiener. And this has been the thrust of the U.S. government top secret programs ever since, the man-machine.
Yeah, that doctor there, I mean, this Wiener guy, Norbert or Norman Wiener, I mean, I'd never heard of this character at all in any of the years I've been doing research. And then Aaron and Melissa Dykes from Truthstream Media, I seen them putting a video out, and he was in it. And I tell you what, this guy, I mean, if you want to go back to somebody that was pivotal in all of this kind of electronic mind control, Doc, this guy was right at the forefront, wasn't he?
Yes, yeah. And of course, you know, again, he belongs to this tribe, Kev. just like Ray Kurzweil, who's been promoting, you know, this singularity event when computers become more powerful than humans, and you know, I mean, this is for them. This is all very, very wonderful. This is something to be sought after, you know, with great zeal. And of course, they have the tribe has a lot of money, and so this then they've been able to kind of harness the through that money, they've been able to harness the intellectual and institutional power of the nations towards realizing that goal. And I think that really is what this is about. This is about achieving an immortal type of immortality for a small group of people. But it doesn't sound great to me and you, but to them it sounds just hunky-dory. Next one is Restoring Active Memory, RAM. The RAM program aims to develop and test a wireless, fully implantable neural interface medical device for human clinical use. The device would facilitate the formation of new memories and retrieval of existing ones. Translation: control of memories and the creation of personal identities generated by computers. It's great. This is all DARPA, which of course is the research branch of the Defense DoD. Reliable neural interface technology is the fifth. ReNet, reliable neural interface technology. The ReNet program seeks to develop the technologies needed to reliably extract information from the nervous system, and to do so at a scale and rate necessary to control complex machines such as high-performance prosthetic limbs. Translation: neural interrogation invades our minds. So, you know, the most basic, there's one more. Systems-based neurotechnology for emerging therapies is acronym SubNets. The SubNets program seeks to create implanted, closed-loop diagnostic and therapeutic systems for treating neuropsychological illnesses and networks of the brain. Translation: mechanical psychiatrists will be able to prescribe neural restructuring of the personality. Now, this is all coming out of that article by Anonymous Patriots in 2016 about the false flags being legal propaganda by the DoD. And here they go into some of the DoD's bag of tricks. And all of this stuff sounds, draconian, I think, is far too mild. It sounds like a redesigning of the human organism. And if you believe, perhaps like we do, that humans are God's creation and made in the image of God, and maybe the crown of God's creation, this doesn't sound so hot.
I know evolution, I mean, it's a bit up in the air, but I mean, this is like a forced evolution. And we're not being asked about this. And what they're forcing us into is a cybernetic future. And I mean, I watch a lot of these TV shows that are set in dystopic futures and stuff like that, Doc. And we know even the TV shows, they're programming us as well. And they're showing us literally all the stuff that we talk about in a near future scenario. And, you know, sometimes watching that dramatized kind of adaptations of the real world stuff we talk about, it helps some of the stuff that we talk about on shows like this sink in, because we can talk about all of these programs and all of this technology, but only once you actually see it put into context do people actually maybe grasp what this is all about. And that's why I like to almost decode the programming that we see on television to see what it is that they're actually forewarning us about.
Absolutely, and this seems to be it. It seems to be it. Different flavors. Ronnie Kilda said, if you want to understand the gang stalking system, the two best movies are Control Factor and The Manchurian Candidate, made in 1962 with Frank Sinatra. I think there's others. I think The Game is pretty good. I think The Lives of Others is a movie made in Germany after the wall came down about what the Stasi police did with the citizen spies in the security state there in communist East Germany. That's very good. And then there's a few others. But yes, the movies tell us what's going on. And according to Ronnie Kilda, Control Factor just nails it to the T. So it's one way they have of kind of, I guess they call it, predictive programming, where we're all kind of primed and ready now to accept these new realities that they have.
Absolutely. It's revelation of the method as well. It's part of this magic that they use upon us. Again, touching on this spiritual, this magical side to things. And everything in this world has got that side to it. There's the good and the bad. And tonight we're covering all of this with the quite brilliant Dr. Eric Karlstrom right here on the Kev Baker Show. We have done so many shows on this now, and we're building so big a picture. If you're a first-time listener, please check out the other shows that I've done with Doc. Myself and Johnny Whistles now, like the Doc said earlier, probably over a year's worth of information. And what I always like to give the Doc credit for is the fact that when you go through these absolutely in-depth, brilliant articles and some of the documents that he's managed to get a hold of, I mean, everything, absolutely everything, you can see where he's got it from. It's all linked. He gives credit to any of the researchers out there who have gone before him. And that in itself, that's why he's one of my favourite guests right here on the show. And I'm so, so, so proud of these shows that we're putting on. And I think you have to put them all together, hours upon hours of radio now, to really build up that picture as well. Because like we said earlier on, this is the most important policy in the USA. But I think we can scrap that. We can almost scrub out the USA in the world. Because as we're talking about and as the show progresses, we're showing it's not confined to US shores. You know, when we've got this satellite-based internet and all of this is all around the planet, that all of us, there are no borders then. This is a most important policy on a global scale. So when we come back from the break, we've got one segment to go with Dr. Karlstrom. Don't forget, Phoenix Rising Radio coming up on the show tonight. And we'll be right back after these groovy messages. Don't go anywhere, folks. Really great show tonight.
This is the Kev Baker Show.
Welcome back. Final segment, unfortunately, with Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Tonight we're continuing our series of shows. And not only that, we've got Johnny Whistles back with us as well. And John, a question from the chat room there, and I imagine a few of the listeners might be asking this as well, because the doc mentioned two movies that really, really show you what's going on with all of this stuff we talk about. One of them, the very famous Manchurian Candidate, but there was another one, John, that somebody in the chat room asked about, and this itself was a movie I'd never heard of, so you want to give that a shout out?
Yeah, will do, Kev. It was actually Andrea NZ that had asked what film it was, and it's called Control Factor. And you can get it online. You don't have to go to the movies to watch it.
And that's on my to-do list, and I finally caught the Cloverfield paradox today, recommended by several listeners. Heel reminded me in the chat last night, and oh wow, particle accelerators, space, dimensions, demons. It's got to be watched. You really need to see that if you're into any of the stuff we watch here. But let's waste no more time, because we're getting back into it with Dr. Eric Karlstrom. Check out his website. He's got 5 of them, but the one most relevant to this has to be Gang Stalking Mind Control Cults. So, Doc, back to you, and I can't believe it because here we are, final segment already.
Yeah, and we're really been working off of this one article in particular by anonymous patriots, but we've been adding lots of other things to it. And maybe I just kind of again stand back a little bit, get a historical perspective by several quotes. Book of Deuteronomy, first book written in the Bible, apparently about 700 BC. Cursed is anyone who attacks a neighbor in secret. And all the people will reply, Amen. It's Deuteronomy 27:24. Well, that's what gang stalking is. That's a group of people attacking somebody in secret. A little bit like the movie, the Murder on the Orient Express, where everybody stabs the victim once, and it's like, well, who can we lock up? Everybody's involved. It's a death of 1,000 cuts. It's a very odious and pernicious system which involves many elements of the community to break the targeted individual down and to dispose of him or her. Thomas Jefferson, moving closer to the present, it is error alone which needs the support of government. Truth can stand by itself. Fortunately for us, Kev, we're standing on the side of truth. The government has billions of dollars to support their lies, but I think the truth is like grass. It's going to grow through the cracks in the concrete, and we have to have the positive that that's going to carry the day in the end. And our friend Thomas Jefferson, who I think most Americans really venerate, said this also: the God who gave us life gave us liberty at the same time. The hand of force may destroy, but cannot disjoin them. Let's hope that's true, because yeah. And moving closer, President Dwight D. Eisenhower was a 5-star general in World War II. And in 1961, he said this in his farewell address: "We have been compelled to create a permanent arms industry of vast proportions. Added to this, 3.5 million men and women are directly engaged in the defense establishment. We annually spend on military security more than the net income of all United States corporations." That has been true right to the present. This conjunction of an immense military establishment and a large arms industry is new in the American experience. The total influence, economic, political, even spiritual, is felt in every city, every state house, every office of the federal government. We recognize the imperative need for this development, yet we must not fail to comprehend its grave implications. Our toil, resources, and livelihood are all involved. So is the very structure of our society. In the councils of government, we must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex. The potential for the disastrous rise of misplaced powers exists and will persist. We must never let the weight of this combination endanger our liberties or democratic processes. We should take nothing for granted. And this is the key sentence: only an alert and knowledgeable citizenry can compel the proper meshing of the huge industrial and military machinery of defense with our peaceful methods and goals, so that security and liberty may prosper together. That's our job, is to try to get the citizens a little more alert and knowledgeable so that they're in the game. And he says also, akin to and largely responsible for the sweeping changes in our industrial military posture has been the technological revolution during recent decades. In this revolution, research has become central. It also becomes more formalized, complex, and costly. A steadily increasingly share is conducted for, by, or at the direction of the federal government. Today, the solitary inventor tinkering in his shop has been overshadowed by task forces of scientists in laboratories and testing fields. In the same fashion, the free university, historically the fountainhead of free ideas and scientific discovery, has experienced a revolution in the conduct of research. Partly because of the huge costs involved, a government contract becomes virtually a substitute for intellectual curiosity. For every old blackboard, there are now hundreds of new electronic computers. He said this in 1961. The prospect of domination of the nation's scholars by federal employment, project allocations, and the power of money is ever present and is gravely to be regarded. Yet in holding scientific research and discovery in respect, as we should, we must also be alert to the equal and opposite danger that public policy could itself become the captive of a scientific technological elite. Wow. Well, that happened.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a perfect description for it, isn't it?
Yeah. I mean, here he's, of course, he's five-star general, ultimate insider. He saw this coming. And let me just throw in this quote. This is Colonel George Hunter White, FBN, OSS CIA, who was the guy who operated Operation Midnight Climax, one of the MK Ultra sub-projects. Unfortunately, this mentality is all too pervasive in the military. I told wholeheartedly in the vineyards because it was fun. Where else could a red-blooded American boy lie, kill, and cheat, steal, deceive, rape, and pillage with the sanction and blessing of the All-Highest? Pretty good stuff, brother. Well, I mean, how many guys like that are there in special operations? I would venture to say that this is the personality that they rely upon, and they either create it or they select for that attitude. So the people that are working those C4ISRs perhaps have this mentality to an extent. In other words, they're protected by this national security establishment. It's a criminal syndicate, basically. Okay, well, did you want to comment on that, Johnny or Kev?
I'm just letting you go where you need to go, Doc, because I know you've got so much to cover, and I want you to cram in as much as you can. Don't get me wrong. If I hear something, you know me, I'll jump all over the top of you. I'll be really disrespectful like that. But no, I'm really enjoying letting you just have the floor here. So wherever you want to take this is your show tonight, your floor. Take us where you want, Doc.
Okay, well, going back to this 2016 article by Anonymous Patriots, they say, quote, President Obama and the powers that are behind him weren't kidding when he said that he would transform America. They have a motive, a means, and an opportunity to effect positive public support for any agenda items through the work of the DoD and the BBG, that's the Broadcasting Board of Governors of the Department of Defense, within the boundaries of America. It doesn't matter whether it is gun control, the Iran deal, bombing other nations, Trans-Pacific Partnership, Obamacare, NDAA, National Defense Authorization Act, or any agenda item. Somehow he pushes it through without much resistance. And when public consent cannot be manufactured with perception management and psychological manipulation of narrative networks, Obama...
What's that pesky Obama been doing now?
Well, of course, now we got a new president, but not that much changes. Obama just writes another executive order, Presidential Policy Directive, PPD, Presidential Study Directive, PSD, or Presidential Policy Guidance, PPG, or whatever he wants to rename his misuse of executive authority. In the name of national security, Obama has bombed Syria, Libya, Iraq, Somalia, and Yemen without any congressional approval. These acts of war were accompanied with excellent smoke and mirrors, perception management, and DARPA subliminal devices. Only a few lone voices pointed out that we need congressional approval to wage war.
And I think we need to add to that, don't ever forget that Obama won the Nobel Peace Prize before doing all of the above. You just make this stuff up. Johnny Whistles, I mean, talk about lunacy.
Well, Kev, he also wrote more executive orders than the last 3 presidents put together. That tells you everything.
Yeah, and what was his big thing? He had a phone and he had a pen. And Donald Trump, he hasn't been shy with his orders either. I mean, most of them to roll back stuff that Obama actually did do. But, I mean, it hasn't put an end to any of the programs that we're talking about tonight, Doc. That's the thing that, you know, even the most ardent supporters of Trump out there, and I don't have any dog in this political fight. I don't trust any of them. I really don't. They're all con artists, like we explained earlier. They work for a higher power. But, I mean, what's important, I think, is people see that none of this stuff has gone away. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, of course, the Democrats and Republicans are controlled, I believe, by the same powers. It's the corporatocracy, it's the people in the Wall Street and the City of London who are calling the shots.
It's a conocracy because it's just one giant con game.
Yeah, it's one. Yeah, exactly. They're conning us with the two-party system, essentially. And the policies remain in place, doesn't matter. Every time you vote for change, you get the same basic structure. So moving to the solutions by these anonymous patriots, let me just go through some of these because I want to end on a positive note if we can. First, arm yourself with the truth like a two-edged sword. Read and reread this article, which I have posted on my Gang Stalking Mind Control Cults.com website. As painful as it may be for you, do your own research from what we have provided you. Second, arm yourself with a consciousness higher than the driving force of global manipulation for personal power and greed, like a personal shield. Personal self-awareness has always been the fulcrum of human evolution. Oftentimes, it comes down to a few people, or even one person who turns the tide of evil away from controlling the evolution of human consciousness. One lawsuit can turn the tables. One law, one person, one patriot. Third, arm yourself with the knowledge of the weapons being used against you and the motives. Once you have that knowledge, you can find devices to counteract some of those weapons. There are an equal number of good devices to counter the evil ones. Fourth, arm yourself with the knowledge to discern when narratives, story lies, in other words, false flag terrorist operations, are being used to manipulate you against your will. Take the 12 steps of perception management as presented above and apply them to possible false flag scenarios to learn to recognize the patterns and see through to reality. Fifth, arm yourself against your enemy and attempt to neutralize them using their own methods and devices. A call goes out to all patriots to secretly subvert political manipulation of Americans on American soil. In other words, wait for the right moment, and then throw a monkey wrench into the works. Help the evil devices malfunction and upset the official story, quote unquote, with random acts of patriotism. Six, arm yourself with the justice of the law and bring lawsuits against domestic propaganda and subliminal manipulation of Americans or anyone. Seventh, arm yourself against government agendas that now consider Americans to be enemy combatants on domestic soil, who must be supportive of agendas that take away American liberties and constitutional rights. Well, there's some positives. I think we're kind of on those tracks, aren't we?
We definitely are.
That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to arm ourselves with the knowledge of what's going on, and we stake out the territory of patriots here, even though others might on the opposite side might be waving the flag as vigorously as they can. What they've done is destroyed the U.S. Constitution, and what they have done is disobeyed their oaths to protect and defend the Constitution. Certainly, when they're targeting American citizens and killing them, this is a violation of their mission, which is to protect the American people. And this would go for the other nations of the world also, where the U.S. military and intelligence operatives have got the governments there and the intelligence agencies there to do the same thing to the citizens of those nations. So this is a global problem now.
I mean, it's how long have they actually been doing this? Do you know what I mean? They've been doing this from the early days, and if they spend so much time on something, then it is definitely working.
Yeah, these methods have certainly become refined, and it's very interesting to see where the next voice is going to come in with some new policy or something that basically reinforces what they've already been doing. And I wanted to just get into this idea before we leave here, Kevin, Johnny, of cognitive infiltration of conspiracy theorists, which in fact is synonymous really with the gang stalking program and is identical with the information warfare that the military and intelligence is conducting against Americans. In 2008, a Chicago law professor named Cass Sunstein, who headed the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs and was the information czar, and who sat on the NSA oversight panel, wrote a book entitled Conspiracy Theories and Other Dangerous Ideas. In 2008, he also co-authored a white paper entitled Conspiracy Theories. In this paper, he urged government to put online trolls on the payroll to harass dangerous, quote, conspiracy theorists and to hire undercover agents to infiltrate the lives of conspiracy theorists in order to frame them and discredit them. Well, that sounds like gang stalking, doesn't it? And here's a guy who was a law professor, like Obama was in Chicago, who rose to the top of the ranks here. Sunstein said, direct quote, government may ban conspiracy theorizing. Government may impose some kind of tax, financial or otherwise, on those who disseminate such theories. And this same guy has also urged the repealing of the Second Amendment, by the way.
We're all seeing that just now. I mean, let's face it, we're kind of living that. I've had tweets that disappear. So many other people out there post on Facebook or any one of these other social media gulags that we all walked into blindfolded. Then, I mean, all of this stuff, I mean, all of that is suspect to being taken down, Doc. And they might not admit to the fact that they censor conspiracy theorists, and even that, we know that term has been used against us. That was thrown out there by these same characters and their perception shenanigans that they play. But I mean, this is going on right now, and the internet's a perfect way to see it. And like we said before the show, probably when they were sitting in that smoky room thinking about the advantages from their side, the control that they could impose via the internet, we've really been able to turn that round, that information warfare, like we keep talking about, and use the internet to our own good. And think of the people we're even reaching right now, Doc. There you are in your little corner of paradise. I won't disclose your location, but we're over here in our little corner of what seems like the Antarctic with the polar vortex touching us in Scotland. And at the touch of a button, we're speaking to so many people around the world. And, you know, we have to take advantage of the internet as it is, as for as long as we can, because we look to places like China, and even commenting on something that might sound like it goes against some government policy, that's enough for you to get shut out of the internet, censored completely, and then you have no voice. And that future is coming to us real soon. So I think we have to do as much as we can in the time we have the internet, Doc.
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, to understand this larger historical tension then between, you know, the forces of control and greed and money and the interests of the populace, you know. And so, you know, if you look at deeply into the American history, for instance, it's always been a war between big money and the popular interest. And there are periods where big money kind of wins and people suffer, and there are other times when, you know, the popular interest makes inroads. But right now, we're definitely we're kind of outgunned. And what we're doing is we're trying to understand the forces that are being directed against the people. And I think we're making some inroads in these interviews here. And I really appreciate the opportunity, Kevin and Johnny, to be talking about these issues, because it takes a certain amount of courage to stand up and put yourself on the line.
I mean, I hear the shows, obviously, that we do here, and I'm not just saying this, but TFR as a network, I'm really proud of the fact that we do put this information out there, because this is really high-level information, and you present it in such a great way. All of it documented on the website for people to go and look for themselves as well. Something we've really been telling people to do these days, go and research everything that we say. I mean, it really is. I mean, this is, like we say, the most important thing that we're covering right now.
Yeah, and I think it, you know, when you talk about the kind of subversion that you might experience on the internet, well, you know, the U.S. military now regards information warfare, you know, on a par with their air, land, and sea capabilities.
I actually remembered what I was going to ask you, Doc. I got lost there. I got lost in my thought, but I was going to ask you, I mean, aside from TFR, I mean, do you get any problems going on any other networks? I mean, I don't imagine all the networks want to cover this kind of stuff.
Well, I feel that I've done a number of podcasts with another targeted individual named Romola D, who is very, very knowledgeable. She's an ex-professor.
Yeah, she does really great work. I had on one of her other guests, Jeff Godwin, who covers the targeting over here in the UK. So Romola does some really great work.
Yes, she does. And we've done a series of podcasts, and we certainly have been interfered with. Our computers have been interfered with, and I've experienced electronic attack as far as I'm concerned. And when you look at some of those podcasts, you'll see my words will be slurred at certain parts of the interview, or my face will be blurred throughout, and it's obviously it's being manipulated, we say that not because we're paranoid, but because it consistently happens when she and I do a podcast. And I think it is because, we can really get down to cases because she knows the territory, and I've done a lot of research as well. So, yeah, that has been the venue that has been most interfered with by what I assume are computer network operations.
And, Doc, we've had our issues. I mean, one time we could hardly hear each other. We were struggling to connect. And we definitely experienced something going on that night. I know for a fact that people from D-Wave Systems, the quantum computer makers, they listen to this. They actually admitted it in one of their recent talks. I know the guy that created Sophia the robot, Ben Gortzel, he listens to this show right here on this network. And I'm suspecting, right, because they're not all bad people that are actually in the FBI and the police and even government itself. And I honestly think the fact that we do almost get left alone, touch wood, really touching wood here, because I'm surprised by the fact that we don't get in trouble for talking the way we do. I mean, me in particular, I know you have your problems, Doc, but so far, so good. And I'm wondering if one of the good guys in there, because I have to hope there's good guys and girls in there, I wonder if they're almost listening to this, egging us on. Because it's hard for these people to speak out. I've been in the military, and, with the level of clearance and stuff that these people must have, they'd be risking all sorts of jail time just to even come on here and say yes to what Doc's saying. And I wonder if the fact we're allowed to broadcast this might be an indication that there are good people in there, because they could easily wipe this out if they wanted, Doc. They could put static on it. We couldn't connect. There's so many ways they could wipe out the show, but they don't. And that there gives me hope as well.
Yeah, you've raised some very good points. I think certainly there's lots of good people in government who related areas who are in a chain of command, and therefore their hands are tied. It would be wonderful if you could get a whistleblower or two, to come on your show to say, hey, well, this is what's really going on. Dr. Eric Karlstrom, he talked about this, that, and the other, but hey, this is what we're really doing, because they would know at a higher level about what's going on, and they would have more details and more specifics. It would be wonderful to get those whistleblowers, but like you say, it's against the law to do that.
We're building to that. Exactly. I mean, look what happened to Snowden. Love him or hate him, inside job or not. Just look at the way they went after that guy. And that's why I've recently become suspicious of people like QAnon as well. And I know I'm sticking my head above the parapet again saying that, but plays like a perfect psyop. And people that have that level of information, I just don't know how they would be able to actually share that without serious repercussions. And in this day and age, I don't care it's 4chan or 8chan. I mean, they know everything, absolutely everything. I'm sure we could use the best IP spoofing devices in the world. It's nothing to these people. But Dr. Karlstrom, this has been another amazing show. We're out of time yet again. Johnny Whistles, it's been great to have you back tonight. And Phoenix Rising Radio will be coming up after the break. Check out the Doc's work, please, over at gangstalkingmindcontrolcults.com. I'll be back tomorrow night. Until then, wherever you are, make it TFR, Johnny.
And dinna touch that dial.